welcome to Learning Thursdays. My name is Bridget Hartman DeCenzo, and I'm your host for Learning Thursdays. Today's presentation is Getting to Know Prime for Life. Co-author of Prime for Life, Ray Doherty, Vice President of Programs, Ina Mitchell, and Research Analyst Alan Barger will guide you through an overview of the program. All Learning Thursdays presentations are free of charge and approved for 1.5 credentialing hours. After registering for each presentation, you will be sent a link for the broadcast, the PowerPoint, associated handouts, and a credentialing certificate. Type or write in your name in the space provided on the certificate, and please be sure to send in the sign-in sheet for verification to the address as indicated on the form. It's important to note that the OASAS credentialing unit may not approve your certificate if the sign-in sheet is not on file here at OASAS. And if you have any questions regarding Learning Thursdays, please send your questions to learningthurs@oasas.ny.gov. Your feedback is appreciated. Please take a moment to complete this brief survey at the conclusion of the presentation. The link is also included in your email that you received with the link to this presentation. And now I will hand the presentation over to Ray Doherty.
Hi, I'm Ray Doherty, and we're here today to talk about Prime for Life. Prime for Life is a motivational intervention. It's designed to help people reduce the risk for alcohol and drug problems and to protect what's important in their life. Prime for Life is the standardized curriculum for the New York DDP, the Drinking Driver Program, and is used statewide with drinking drivers and with drug offenders in 17 other states. It's also used worldwide by the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. In addition, it's used at times with parent groups, with some schools, and some colleges. So it's very likely that at some time or another you will have clients coming in who have been through Prime for Life. They may be making references to things that you wonder, what was Prime for Life talking about? May use language, they may use analogies. Would like to introduce you to those today. Would also like to introduce you to some of the, not just the program itself, but some of the theory, the thinking that goes behind the program as well. Prime for Life is research-based, it is theory-driven, and it is listed on the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices.
So before we actually look at the content or the process, I want to just start with thinking about the audience that we're working with in the Prime for Life program. Many of the people who come to the Prime for Life program are there because they're mandated. Either they've had some type of driving offense, an impaired driving related arrest, or drug possession, public intoxication, underage possession, all sorts of different types of offenses that can bring a person to the Prime for Life class. And it's a challenge because when we're working with a population like that, we are working with one population, or at least one group of people in one classroom or one group room, where some of the people have alcoholism or addiction and some do not. So working with an audience like this is a challenge, and we want to be able to meet both needs, those who already have addiction and those who do not. And so we like to think of the Prime for Life program as a motivational intervention. It's not just an educational program. For those of you that have been in the field for a while, you know that education by itself really is not associated with a whole lot of change in behavior. But Prime for Life is not designed to change what people know. It's designed to help people change what they do. We want to help people look at their choices in life and make decisions that can protect the things that they value.
We want to start their experience in a different way, and I'd like to start our experience today in exactly the same way so that you get a sense of how we begin the Prime for Life program. With very little introduction, we just go directly into a discussion of values, and I'd like for us to do the same here. I'd like for you to think for a moment of what are the 4 top values in your life. We give participants in Prime for Life a listing of things like family, friends, freedom, love, creativity. So think of those kinds of categories of what's most important to you and identify the top 4. So just go ahead and pause the video right now. Actually write down the 4 areas of life, the 4 values that are most important to you. Now that you have your top 4 values written down, what we would do in Prime for Life is ask people to talk to one other person around them and share what's most important about at least one of those values, perhaps more. I'd like for you to do the same thing. If you're watching with a colleague, pause the video and talk with each other. Share about what's most important in your life and why. Not just what it is, but why is that important to you? Now, if you're watching this alone, just take a few minutes and write it down. Pause the video now. Okay, now that you've identified the most important things in your life and why they're important to you, I'd like for you to reflect on how you would feel if in 4 or 5 years into the future, you see those values active in your life. What would that look like? What would it look like for those 4 values to be real and thriving in your life in the future? Identify a word of how it would make you feel and think of a description of what that would look like. Write it down. Go ahead and pause the video and do that now. In a Prime for Life class, when participants do this, we begin to see a lot of smiles, and we hear words like awesome, or incredible, or fulfilled. It would make me feel good. That's what we're all looking for, right? So what we explain to people is what Prime for Life is all about, what we're going to be doing for all these hours that we have together, is learning ways to protect those things that are most important in life. It's a little surprising beginning for people coming into a Prime for Life class. They weren't expecting that. And now we have their attention in a different way. But we're still not going to spend a lot of time talking about alcohol and drugs. There's other things to do first. Now let's talk for a minute about why we do this. What's the theory behind it? Well, in a very simple way, what we're looking to do is make a heart connection before we start making a head connection. But it goes even a little deeper than that. We draw on 2 models of change, the lifestyle risk reduction model and the Transtheoretical model. Let's think for a moment about the Transtheoretical model.
The Transtheoretical model was developed by Carlo Di Clemente and James Prochaska, and this model is mostly known for the stages of change. And there are 5 stages of change. We have the pre-contemplation stage, the contemplation stage, the preparation stage, the action stage, and then the maintenance stage. So starting with the pre-contemplation stage. The pre-contemplation stage is when people do not see any need for change. It's not even on their radar. I'm not thinking about it, I'm not considering it. The contemplation stage is where I'm starting to think about it. It's sort of like I'm in this in-between of, well, maybe I want to do this, but maybe I also want to still do this. Then preparation is when the person is starting to get ready for change. They've committed to it and they're ready to begin making a plan. And then action is once I've already put that, I've made the change. I've actually started putting steps into place. And then maintenance is once that change has become a solid enough part of my life that it's become sort of my new way of living, and it's just become kind of taking on a life of its own. It's sort of like the new me. So why is it that these stages of change have become such an important part of not only the Prime for Life program, but in human behavior change in general? Well, the heart of the model is actually not the stages. The heart of the model is the tasks that have to be completed by the client to move from one stage to the next. So as the program developers, we have to look at all of the program content in a way that is ensuring that people are going to be able to complete those tasks in order to move through the stages. The important thing for the clinicians and instructors to remember is that it's the work of the client, not the work of the counselor. So the clients have tasks that they have to complete. And it can be very helpful as the counselor or the instructor to kind of have an idea of where the clients are, what's going on with the client, which stage of change they're in, because then that helps me tailor the content or the activities that I'm going to be working on according to the needs of the client. Now keep in mind, as I said early on, we have a challenge. We're working with people in the Prime for Life group who are in all different stages. So we have to make assumptions. And one of the assumptions that we make is that most people come into the program in pre-contemplation. Now certainly we're going to have people in all stages, but it's very likely and very common in a program like this where we have a lot of mandated clients coming in that many of them are going to be in the pre-contemplation stage. So that's where we start with the program. And the task of pre-contemplation include two major things. One is that the client needs to develop concern about their current behavior. If I'm not concerned about my current behavior, there's no reason for me to make changes. There's no reason for me to do anything different. But once I start developing concern, then it gives me pause. Part of developing concern has to do with risk perception. So the very first part of the Prime for Life program, in fact, the first several hours of the Prime for Life program are really designed to help bring about perception of risk, an increased perception of risk, and to develop concern about my current behavior. So here's the thing. Most people in our society believe that they have risk for heart disease. Most people in our society believe that they have risk for cancer, and it's all, multiple forms of cancer and heart disease. But it's really interesting that if we were to just go out on the street and ask people if they thought that they could develop heart disease, cancer, they would say yes. But if we asked the same people if they thought that there was some risk that they could develop alcoholism or drug addiction, most of them would say no. And that's really curious because if we look at our leading causes of death and leading causes of problems in our society, all three of those would be at the top of that list. So the thing is most people don't perceive risk for alcoholism and drug-related problems. And so we want to help give them information that will help them perceive that risk. The same way people have made changes in their life because of heart disease concerns or cancer concerns, many of us have changed our diet or our exercise routine because of that personalized risk. A lot of times people don't even look at addiction in the same way that they look at heart disease or cancer. They look at it more as the kind of person someone is instead of the kind of choices a person makes. So we spend a lot of time helping them see that it's not the kind of person I am, it is the choices that I make, and we use a heart disease analogy to help describe that. So we'll take a minute and just let you kind of get a feel for how that works by looking at one of the infographics or animations in the Prime for Life program.
Who has risk for heart disease? Everyone does, but not everyone has the same level of risk. We're all born with a certain level of biological risk. We can't change that. What we can change is the risk created by our choices. Together, our biology and our choices determine whether we develop heart disease or not. We can think of this as a risk formula. Biology plus choices equals outcome. This is the basic formula for all lifestyle-related health problems like heart disease and many of today's other leading health problems. Let's look at the role each part plays. First, biology. All humans have certain things in common. Each of us has a body, and each of our bodies has an inborn risk for various health problems. Yet we are also different. Each of us is born with a different level of risk for heart disease. This risk level is like a set point where heart disease will be triggered. We'll call this threshold a trigger point. It means the point at which heart disease begins or is triggered. Anyone can develop heart disease, but the risk varies from person to person. Now, some people inherit increased biological risk. This means heart disease can be triggered more easily in them than in the average person. Basically, people who have a parent with heart disease are more likely to develop heart disease themselves. The younger the parent was when the heart disease developed, the greater the risk their adult children will develop heart disease too. Some people have lower biological risk. This just means it will take longer to trigger heart disease. And some people have risk triggers that fall somewhere in the middle. Think of it like a journey to a destination, say to the Pacific Ocean. Some of us, those who live in the West, would have a very short path to take before arriving. For those who live on the East Coast, it would take much longer to arrive. And for those who live in the Midwest, the arrival time would be somewhere in the middle. The point is that different people have different levels of biological risk, but everyone has some level of risk. Now, about choices. While we can't change our level of biological risk, we can change the risk created by our choices. Our choices affect our bodies in ways that determine whether or not we will reach our trigger point. Now, choice refers to both quantity and frequency. How much and how often we engage in behaviors that can either increase or decrease our risk for heart disease. Let's go back to that trip to the Pacific Ocean. Choices such as how fast we drive or what exits we take will help determine our arrival time. Choices that increase risk for reaching our trigger point for health problems are called high-risk choices. Choices that are not likely to trigger health problems are called low-risk choices. Let's talk about low-risk choices in regard to heart disease so we have the information we need to prevent that lifestyle-related health problem.
So that animation gives us a feel for how we explain that everyone has some level of risk. And we're using heart disease as an analogy. Here's how we like to think about that. It's disarming. Again, a lot of people come into the Prime for Life program feeling like they're going to be told, what to do and what not to do, and they're going to be judged for where they are. And instead, we talk about their values, and then we talk about heart disease and how it develops. And it gives us a common way of thinking that is inclusive. And it just keeps it removed from looking at addiction and alcoholism right off the bat. And it is disarming, and it helps lower defenses so that people are willing to listen a little bit longer for what's going to come next. So one of the things that we also help them understand in terms of, just the whole heart disease analogy is that it is like a formula. My biology plus my choices determines the outcome, but there's also things that influence the choices I make. So I have internal influences, my personality, the characteristics I have, my preferences, my attitudes, my beliefs. All of those things will influence the choices that I make. They will influence the choices I make around diet and exercise. If I think it's boring to exercise, I'm less likely to exercise. But if I really love it and I find it challenging, then I'm more likely to exercise. There's also social influences. And social influences are all of those things that come from outside of us, our family, our friends, the people we work with, society in general, media, what I'm seeing on TV and reading in magazines and what I see online through social media, all of those things will also influence my choices. So if I have friends who are very fit and they exercise very regularly and they're watching their diet, it becomes an influence on me to do the same. However, if my friends are eating a high-fat, high-calorie diet and not exercising as consistently, that may also influence me to make similar choices. Or let's say, for example, that my husband does a lot of the cooking at home and he likes to fry food. I'm more likely to eat fried food simply because that's a social influence on my choices. Here's the thing, my psychological factors in my life, my personality, my beliefs, the social factors in my life, my friends, my family, they cannot cause me to develop heart disease. They only influence my choices. Ultimately, whether or not I develop heart disease is the interaction of my biology plus the choices I make. The choices are influenced by those outside sources or the internal sources, but it's ultimately my choices that determine whether or not I develop heart disease. So the one thing I have in my control around heart disease is the choices I make. I can't choose my biology. If I have a family history of heart disease, I can't change that because that was just given to me in my genetics, my biology. But my choices I can change. That is something in my power. And so by setting the stage with the heart disease analogy, you can see where we're going with this. For those of you who've worked in the addiction field for a long time, you already notice it. And even for those of us who are newer to the field, you can see the analogy beginning to unfold. You can see how the pieces of this formula also will hold true for alcoholism and drug addiction. We all have a biological risk. Some of us have a family history of alcoholism, and that increases risk. We share with them data and research on what we know about that risk during the program. We also have choices we make. Whether or not we make low risk or high risk choices will interact with our biology to either determine, yes, I'm at greater risk for developing alcoholism, or I'm at less risk for developing alcoholism and drug addiction, all based on the choices I make. Those choices will be influenced by my psychological and social factors, just like we saw with heart disease, what my friends are doing, certain characteristics that I may have. Research shares with us, we can learn so much from looking at the research. We know that there are characteristics that are associated with higher rates of alcoholism and drug addiction. While research does not support an addictive personality, we do know that there are some common traits among people who do develop it. So we share that with the participants. Once I learn that information, I see myself. I can see, do I have these traits? Do I belong to these groups of people where there are that is associated with higher rates? Do I have the personality traits that are characterized by higher rates of addiction and alcoholism? And it gives them all a chance to sort of see the big picture and how it all relates to them personally. This is helping me start perceiving risk. It's not just certain kinds of people. Alcoholism and addiction don't just happen to people who are depressed or people who maybe I thought had higher rates, like people who are poor or mentally ill and those sorts of things. The research helps us see that it can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter what group I belong to, how much education I have, if I have higher income or less income, what nationality I am, what race I am, my gender. We know that it's been found in all groups of people. So this can help them increase that risk perception so that I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I did not realize that first of all, everyone has some level of risk and that my choices play such an important role. Now that I have all of that in my mind, it helps me start seeing, wow, alcoholism and addiction are very similar to other lifestyle-related health problems, like heart disease, certain forms of cancer, and other lifestyle-related health problems that are out there. Once they understand that and they realize the importance of choice, it's only natural for us to start looking at our own choices, especially since we have brought that into the combination of helping them look at their values. How are my choices consistent with my values? Or am I seeing some discrepancies? We do that in a very non-judgmental way and non-threatening way. It keeps defenses down. It's allowing them to really think about their own choices, what's important in their life, without feeling judged, without feeling this harsh confrontation. It's in a kind of a very safe environment that helps me look at risk differently than perhaps I would have otherwise.
One of the things we try to keep in mind about developing concern is that it's a very personal process. It is the client who needs to develop concern. We may have concern for them, the judge may have had concern for them, their family may have concern for them. None of that matters until the individual develops concern about him or herself. And that is not something that we can give them. We cannot tell them you are in trouble and that develop concern for them. In fact, it may provoke resistance. It's a very tricky line to walk of how do we help people see that there is reason for the concern in their life without holding it in their face in such a way that it arouses defensiveness. Because if defensiveness starts, then we've lost any chance for change. So our challenge has been to develop an experience that people can go through that will allow them to develop concern without developing defensiveness or resistance. In doing that, we pay a lot of attention to risk perceptions. What danger do they see in their own behavior? Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about risk perception, but there's a whole science behind it, and I'd like to address it for just a moment because there's a couple of important pieces around it. We as human beings think fairly universally, similarly, on risk perceptions, so much so that scientists studying it have been able to identify some clear trends or tendencies that we tend to do as human beings, not just people with alcohol and drug issues. All people have a tendency, or most people have a tendency, to do a couple of things when it comes to risk perceptions. One is, we view risk in a general sense and in a personal sense. So if we talk about the risk of driving fast in a car, for example, I might have a very different view of the risk of you driving fast in a car versus me driving fast in a car. We tend to rate the risk lower for ourselves than we do for others because, after all, I'm a good driver. And we have various ways of thinking about risk that make us feel okay about it in terms of ourselves, even if we acknowledge, yeah, this is dangerous for most people, but I can do this. We can view the gap between how much risk we perceive for most people versus how much we perceive at ourselves, and for ourselves as being the amount of risk we believe we can control. That gap is what we want to work on in Prime for Life. People may come in believing that they're in control of the risk with their alcohol and drug use. In fact, there's a simple phrase people use to describe it, and all of you have heard it many times. People say, I can handle it. That's a risk perception statement, and it says there's nothing I need to worry about in terms of my alcohol and drug use. Developing concern requires raising doubt about that. But that's an internal process. We have to take them through an experience that allows them to come to the point where they say, oh, maybe I'm not controlling this. Maybe I can't control this risk. Also, we view risk differently in terms of sort of a theoretical sense of, in theory, how much risk is associated with a substance versus my own use. And the theoretical sort of sense, the theoretical sense of risk is very much tied to prevention behaviors. You'll hear people say, I would never try meth, it's much too dangerous. That is talking about risk in a general sense. But then there's the risk of how much risk do I perceive with my behaviors. And once again, people will see this differently for themselves and others. Have you ever heard someone say, if most people drank as much as I do, it would kill them? This is making a clear distinction about my use for me versus other people. So we do want to raise a general sense of risk. How risky is a substance, or how risky is 3 drinks versus 6 drinks? We want to raise perceptions about those risks. Ultimately, we want to get people to a point where they are raising questions about their own use. Think about how we do that. It's a long process. In fact, we take several hours to take people through this process of increasing their perception of risk. But one of the starting places for it is just, can I conceive of this being something that could maybe happen to me? We have a lot of ways of protecting ourselves from believing that these problems could happen to us. We're all familiar with denial. What we do is we think about denial in two different ways. There's sort of the clinical denial, that's the classic sense that people talk about. And that is a person who already has a problem with alcohol and drugs who firmly believes, I don't have a problem. But then there's a different type of denial we think of as being a more prevention denial. And that is way back at the beginning of the belief this could not happen to me. Not that it hasn't happened, but at a time when in fact it hasn't, the person believes it can't. And if you think about that, the later denial that most of us deal with in treatment, it hasn't happened, has its roots back in the prevention denial, that belief that it couldn't happen. So when people start telling me it has happened to me, I think they're crazy because I know it can't happen to me, therefore it hasn't happened to me. We really don't get into a direct confrontation of the denial of has it happened or not. We don't start there at all. We don't try to convince people as to whether it's happened or not in their life. We will take them later through a self-assessment process that will help them figure that out. But right now, at the beginning of Prime for Life, all we want to do is crack a door open to the possibility that this could happen to me. So we need a way of thinking about what causes alcohol and drug problems. Is it caused by the kind of person we are, or is it caused by the kind of choices I make? Most of us have been raised in a society where essentially the prevailing belief is alcohol and drug problems happen to certain kinds of people. And you can boil it down to it happens to weak-willed, depressed, dependent losers. And unless I view myself as a weak-willed, depressed, dependent loser, then I'm not likely to think this could happen to me. I think the kind of person I am makes me too strong to ever be vulnerable to this, no matter how much I use. So we try to give a different way of thinking about how alcohol and drug problems happen. We back up and we say, let's look at this as a lifestyle-related health problem, like heart disease.
Another thing that we do is we help redefine tolerance and reframe tolerance. So I'd like to share with you a little piece of that content as well. So when we're talking about tolerance, a lot of people who really enjoy using alcohol or drugs feel that having a high tolerance is a good thing. And it's sort of a macho thing. It's a sign of strength. Oh, I can really handle my alcohol. I can really handle my liquor. So we want to help the clients see tolerance in a different light. It does make sense that I might think of tolerance as being a positive thing to have because it appears that way on the surface. If my friends are drinking alcohol and perhaps not even as much as me, and they're stumbling and they're falling down and they're slurring their speech or they're getting sick, and I'm not experiencing those things, I might think, they're weak, they can't handle it. But I can handle it. You know, this is a strength that I have, and it appears that it's protecting me. So we want to look at the research to determine, is high tolerance an ability, or is it actually putting me at greater risk? And so I'll share with you just a little bit of that research that we share with them. The first thing is that we do know that high tolerance is associated with higher risk. One of the things that we look at to help us make that determination is looking at average blood alcohol level at time of arrest. And We know that the average blood alcohol level at time of arrest is about a 0.15 to a 0.18. And that is actually true for all industrialized countries. So here's the thing. Could a person with a low tolerance drive a vehicle at a 0.15? No, they could not do that. So we know that people with a low tolerance could never reach that high of a blood alcohol level and still be functioning at a level that they would feel safe to drive. While some people may choose to drive even when they know they've had too much to drink or that they are impaired, most people don't do that. In other words, a lot of times when a person does choose to drive a vehicle or put themselves in another situation where they would be risking their life or someone else's, it's often because they feel okay. They feel like they're not impaired. They're able to walk fine. They are able to talk to people and not appear to be intoxicated. And so it confuses them and they feel safe.
I got pulled over for a DUI my first time, and I blew a .23 on the breathalyzer, and the officer said, "I can't believe you're standing up." Well, I thought I was sober. I thought I was absolutely sober. Didn't think there was a thing in the world wrong with me. And here I am blowing a .23 on the breathalyzer.
Some may wonder how a person could be almost 3 times the legal limit and yet still think he's sober. How could it be so clear to the officer Randy was impaired and yet he could not see himself? It's not hard to understand once we know how tolerance works and how it tricks us. Tolerance essentially describes how much alcohol it takes for us to go from being sober to being impaired. What many people aren't aware of is that we actually have 2 different types of tolerance: physical tolerance and mental tolerance. But what exactly is the difference? Physical tolerance describes the amount of alcohol required to impair the way we feel. If we drink to the point of walking unsteady, having slurred speech, feeling a spinning room, then we've felt physical impairment. Now what about mental tolerance? Mental tolerance refers to the amount of alcohol it takes for our higher brain functions to become impaired. These are functions needed to respond to emergency situations and perform complex tasks, such as driving safely. Mental impairment reduces our ability to make quick decisions, respond effectively to more than one thing at a time, or process information. Let's see what happens over a night of drinking. Did you notice that our mental tolerance becomes impaired much sooner than our physical tolerance? Crossing into mental impairment occurs at much lower blood alcohol levels than physical impairment. It's important to understand that mental impairment is still impairment. Evaluating our own impairment based on how we feel just isn't effective. We can feel fine and still be mentally impaired. Now, everyone's tolerance level varies based on our biology, and our tolerance level can increase or decrease based on the amounts of alcohol we continue to consume. But we will always become mentally impaired sooner than we become physically impaired. On top of that, when our physical and mental tolerance increases, they don't increase at the same rate. Our mental tolerance increases much slower than our physical tolerance. Let's think about that for a moment. Because the 2 types of tolerance develop at different rates, over time they become further and further apart. It's mental tolerance that creates much of the risk for problems while driving, yet it changes very little. In this example, I would be impaired at 0.06, but because I'm using my physical impairment level to guide me when I've had too much to drink, it will now take me much longer to reach the point where I believe I've had too much. This means we become mentally impaired long before we're physically impaired, but because we don't know it, we may continue to drink more until we feel the physical effects. The time where we've reached mental impairment but haven't begun to feel physical impairment are the most dangerous. The very nature of tolerance tricks us into thinking we're not impaired when we actually are. Think about what tolerance really does. It makes our brain less sensitive to alcohol. And as tolerance makes our system less sensitive to alcohol, it's also making us less aware of how impaired we are. If you've ever been sober around people who are intoxicated, you've likely noticed that they have a tendency to think they're less impaired than they really are. The higher our tolerance, the less sensitive we are, and the more likely we are to be tricked by it.
this is another way that we help increase that risk perception, to help a common belief that high tolerance is a positive thing, it's an ability, and we just share some research, some new information, a new way of looking at it that helps the clients come to see, wow, I thought this was a positive, and now I realize that my high tolerance is actually putting me at greater risk for problems. So looking at tolerance is one of the ways that we help, going back to the stages of change, thinking about most people coming into the Prime for Life group in pre-contemplation is helping them develop concern, risk perception being a part of that. So at this point, we are a few hours into the content of the program, and to just sort of summarize what we've done so far, we've looked at our values and made that heart connection. We've used an analogy with heart disease to sort of disarm and help bring in something that's sort of a common, everyday thing people might hear about in a way to kind of build a mental bridge to alcoholism and drug addiction that's a little easier to hear at first. We then take that framework, that mental bridge, and look at how it relates to alcoholism and drug addiction, which I wasn't able to do in our time together with you, but that would have happened or does happen in the Prime for Life program. And then I've also given you a snapshot on how we discuss high tolerance and the difference between mental and physical tolerance and physical and mental impairment. All of those are helping them develop concern. My values are helping me develop concern because I'm thinking about how my choices are either protecting or risking the things I value in my life. And the others are helping me just sort of look at research and have a new understanding of some of these concepts that are so tightly associated with risk for alcoholism or addiction and for impairment problems. One of the things that we work with the clients on is separating out impairment problems from health problems. And in the program, we want to help them understand both types and how to prevent both types. Impairment problems happen every day, and because they can happen in any given day or night, they happen more frequently. So we want to help reduce risk for that. We also want to help them reduce risk for health problems, the problems that happen over time. And so I've given you a little bit of a snapshot of how we do that. One other area that I want to just show you a little piece of is what we call phases of use. And this is a section of the Prime for Life program that, once again, is helping develop concern, helping increase risk perception. And it's really designed for the client to self-assess. One of the things that they learn during the heart disease analogy and the mental bridge once we move over to addiction is that we all have a point at which a lifestyle-related health problem could develop. And in this case, we'd be talking about alcoholism or drug addiction. So we all have this point, and we call it a trigger point. It's the point at which alcoholism is there. Now, because we all have a different biology, where I start will be different based on that biology. So if you can imagine a point and 3 different people, or a few different people, each person may be at a different place in relationship to that point because of biology and just differences in biology. If I don't have a family history of alcoholism or drug addiction, I might find that I'm further away from that point. For someone who does have a family history, they may find they're closer to that point. Just like we saw in the heart disease animation earlier, it's the same principle with addiction. At this point in the program, once they have started having this new way of thinking about lifestyle-related health problems, they often want to know, how close am I to that point? How do I know if I'm getting closer to that point? And so the phases of use allows us to describe for them what that looks like. So as clients come to see you, you may hear them use some of this language. And so I want to give you a little short description of each of the phases. There are 4 phases. And in the current version of Prime for Life, those phases are referred to as phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the next version, which will be released at the end of this year, those phases will be referred to as colors: green, yellow, orange, and red. I'm not going to have time to spend describing to you all of the pieces of the phases, but I think I can give you enough of a snapshot to give you an understanding as a clinician of what each phase is and what characterizes each phase. So if a client comes in and says, hey, I think I'm in phase 3, or I went to Prime for Life and I self-assessed in phase 4 or the red phase, you'll know what they are referring to. So we'll start with phase 1, or what will eventually be referred to as the green phase. This phase is characterized by low risk choices. Everyone starts in the green phase, and it's characterized by low risk, meaning that anyone who is in the green phase or phase 1 consistently makes low risk choices. This means they use prescription medications only as prescribed, and they only use their own prescriptions. It also means that they don't use other drugs. They're not using marijuana, they're not using cocaine, they're not using any other substance, including tobacco. They are using alcohol if they choose to drink. It may mean that they abstain from alcohol, or if they do choose to drink, they make low-risk choices around that. Now, in the Prime for Life program, they do learn low-risk guidelines, and we won't have time to go into all of the issues and details around the low-risk guidelines, but we do teach them what low risk means and the research that it's based on. This phase is also characterized by a feeling of take it or leave it. In other words, if the alcohol is present, that's okay. In other words, I might go to eat dinner and I might have a glass of wine, and I might go to dinner and I may not, and it really doesn't matter. It's a take it or leave it attitude. Sometimes I play golf and I have a drink, and sometimes I play golf and I don't. That's a take it or leave it feeling towards the alcohol. When it comes to drugs, they just leave it. It's not a part of life at all. Now, some people in phase 1 or in the green phase also have a leave it feeling towards the alcohol because they choose to abstain. Most people in our society are in the green phase. They stay in this green phase for a lifetime. Most people in our country choose to drink in a low-risk way, or they don't drink at all. About a third of our population chooses to abstain. Now, the next phase is either phase 2 or the yellow phase, and this phase is characterized by high-risk choices. Here's what separates that phase. I'm now making high-risk choices. I'm either using other substances, I'm drinking in a high-risk way, or I'm using prescription medications to get an effect. I'm not any longer using them as prescribed. So I'm making the high-risk choices. But here's the point we want to make with the participants. That is, it's a major shift in life when I go from making low-risk choices to high-risk choices. Typically something's going on. Maybe I've started high school, or I've gone off to college, or I've joined the military, or I have a new job where there's some social influence. And we help them understand that this is a shift. It's a shift in lifestyle that happens moving from the green phase into the yellow phase, or from phase 1 into phase 2. There is a few outcomes that happen in this phase, and the attitude or the feeling towards the drinking or drug use changes in this phase as well. So where we saw a take it or leave it feeling in the green phase, when I get into the yellow phase, I'm starting to anticipate. I'm looking forward to the high risk use. Yes, I might still be looking forward to going to dinner with my friends or going to play golf, but I'm also looking forward to the drinking or the drug use. In other words, it's becoming important. It is taking on a new level of importance in my life. Now, as I transition into the orange phase, or phase 3, it is now becoming so much important in my life that this phase is characterized by psychological dependence. Psychological dependence is made up of 4 separate but related issues. One is I develop a relationship with the alcohol or the drugs. It becomes very important in my life. So an example we use with the participants is if something really good happens in my life, for most of us, we want to call someone and tell them. For someone in phase 3, I start thinking about the drinking, the celebration that's going to happen. On the flip side, if something negative happens in my life, for most of us, we want to tell somebody, we call a friend, we want to share what's happened. In phase 3, often, I want to get drunk, I want to use, I want to drown my drown my troubles, so to speak. So I start turning to the alcohol or drugs instead of turning to a person. And that relationship starting to develop. It's becoming more central. It will even become hobby-like. So, you think of someone who enjoys fishing. If I was to go to a person's home where they enjoy fishing, I'm probably going to find a lot of fishing gear. Fishing poles, tackle box, perhaps they have a boat, and I'm going to be able to find clothing that's associated with fishing. And if I like to drink in a high-risk way, or I like to use drugs, chances are, if you come to my house, you're going to find things that will associate that with me. Perhaps I have a really nice bong set. Perhaps, or a nice bong collection. Perhaps I have started collecting beer bottles or corks from wine bottles. It starts taking on hobby status. I might even wear t-shirts, clothing, hats that sort of identify me as someone who enjoys this. That is just an indication that it's starting to become more central, more important in my life, and this is a part of that psychological dependence. Another part of psychological dependence is I start defending my drinking or drug use. Maybe someone in my life has started to be concerned and they've started asking questions. If I have a good friend that someone's concerned about, the natural thing for me to do is to defend that friend. Well, in phase 3, the friend becomes the alcohol or the drugs often. And so if somebody starts questioning that, it's very common for me to start defending it. So this is another indication that perhaps I have progressed into the 3rd phase or into the orange phase. Now there's a lot of other parts of this that we won't have time to go into, but I think it gives you an understanding of how we're walking the clients through the phases and helping them just very gently see where they fall in these phases. Where am I on that path to where that trigger point is, that point in time where I would trigger addiction? And so that point is in between the 3rd and 4th phase, or in between the orange and red phase. And it's that period of time that sometimes can be a little hard to see, and that is why we're changing the phases to colors, because it allows us to see a gradation. When does yellow turn into orange? When does orange turn into red? There's a period of time there where it can be very difficult to see. What separates the orange phase from the red phase, or phase 3 from 4, is the person is now physically addicted. I now have addiction. And there's really one primary indication that I have developed addiction, and that is periodic loss of control. What is loss of control? Periodic loss of control just simply means I cannot predict when I will stop drinking or using once I start. From time to time, perhaps I can predict, but I can't do that consistently. So if someone is struggling with being able to drink in low-risk quantities, it's a good indication that they've already experienced loss of control. And that is how they can determine if they've already developed addiction. Withdrawal may or may not happen. There's some other typical outcomes of the red phase where we start seeing more problems and we start seeing clustering of problems, and we take the clients through a much longer scenario of what this looks like. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a snapshot to understand what they're learning. And here's the main point of this. The client is self-assessing. I often will tell people there is no one who knows their drinking or drug use better than the person who loves to drink or use. I know my own choices better than anyone else. I know my own experiences. And it can be very powerful when I'm doing a self-assessment of my own use. So in Prime for Life, the instructor is teaching the program in such a way that one way to think about this is we're gently raising a mirror of reality. We're gently raising a mirror for me to look in and see a reflection of my choices and my experiences so I can determine where I am in these phases. When this section of the program is complete, most participants are able to say where they are in the phases. And we give them a few minutes to think about what phase they feel their choices have placed them in and answer some reflection questions about that. How does it feel? What are you thinking at this point, now that you understand where you are in this progression? And it's interesting because at this point, defenses are way down. The room's usually very quiet. And they're sharing things like, I had no idea I was this close to developing addiction. Or, oh my gosh, I'm in phase 4 and I never even thought I had a problem. One time I was teaching recently and a participant came up to me at this point of the program and said, my family has been very concerned and I've been telling them they're meddling in my business, get off my back, and now I see they were right. But it's coming for them. One of the things we know in research is if people can draw their own conclusions, they're more likely to believe it and take it to heart, and that is what this part of the program allows us to do. We give the information, they self-assess, and then we allow them to sit with it for a while. I've given you some content illustrations of how we help them develop concern and increase their risk perception. And remember, that was all from the task of that pre-contemplation stage. At this point, now that they have drawn conclusions and they're starting to see the risk in a different light, a lot of them are starting to think about, well, maybe there is reason for changes. They're learning things about themselves that they had not thought about before. And another task of pre-contemplation is just envisioning a different future, starting to see things differently. And so that's beginning to happen as well. That is when we know that the clients are beginning to move into contemplation. They're starting to think about change. Sometimes we see that just in some resistance that's happening. I mean, if people are thinking about change, they will get resistant. And while we don't want a lot of resistance in the room, we do want to have a nice, gentle tug that we can feel because we know that they're starting to think about it. And when they're asking questions about, how do I know if I'm getting to this point? Or, wow, I didn't realize I had already gotten there. I've always thought my high tolerance was a good thing. The instructor starts hearing these comments, and there are reflection questions built into the content periodically where we have them share their responses. That's feedback for the instructor to see where is the client now, where are they. And once we have that feel that they're in that contemplation stage, the next part of the program is really geared around helping people start to look at ambivalence. Now, the task of this stage is to resolve ambivalence. Perhaps we don't completely resolve ambivalence all the time, but we can resolve it well enough that we can commit to changing and start making that commitment, increasing our motivation to do something differently. And that is what the whole next part of the program is designed to do. Help them look at both the pros and the cons. Start looking at the positive and negative, because anytime someone's ambivalent, it just simply means I want two things that don't go together. And part of the behavior change process is determining which I want most of. I want to protect my family, but I really enjoy being out with my friends and making high-risk choices. I want to protect my job, my self-respect, but I really like the way it feels when I get high. They have to sort of sit with these things and think about them. And one of the things we help instructors realize is that ambivalence is normal. And we want the clients to realize that struggle is normal. So the next part of the program is designed to help them start looking at activities that will help resolve that. One of the things we do is we share a film called Making the Risk Real, Treasures Lost, that shares examples, real life stories of people who have lost things that they value greatly in life. And it also is a heart-wrenching film on sometimes the unthinkable cost associated with high-risk choices. People lose their lives. People have serious injuries. They create a ripple effect for other families that's often unimaginable. And they watch this film, and if we go back to the stages of change, not only do we have tasks that the clients have to complete, there are also processes that the clients are utilizing to help them complete those tasks. And one of those is emotional arousal. A lot of the processes that we use in Prime for Life have to do with consciousness raising and reevaluating our environment and things like that. But this one specifically is around emotional arousal. And we know that that's an important process when people are at the point of thinking about different options. Once we watch the film, we then process it with questions. And often in the group room, that processing, hearing from other people in the room after watching that film is as powerful, if not more powerful, than the film itself. This gives them a chance to hear from others and to just be very real about the risk that making high-risk choices can create. Then there are a series of other activities that will continue to help them with the ambivalence. And then as we get towards the end of the program, we have them to make a commitment to whatever they're willing to do. Some people are willing to make major changes at this point. Others are starting smaller, and that's okay. If I came into this program not thinking I needed to be here, and that it was not even on my radar to make changes, and I can, at this point, say 10 hours into the program, be 70 or 80% committed to making some change, that is a huge step. And the instructors are trained to work with the clients on making those steps, getting ready to put that plan in writing. When the clients leave the Prime for Life program, they will have a plan in place, or they will at least have had the opportunity to put that plan in writing. So as follow-up with participants who have gone through the Prime for Life program, there are several things that you can ask them about their experience. You can ask what they learned about high tolerance. You can ask them what phase they self-assessed in. You could even ask them to bring their workbook to see you in the clinical setting and to get a better understanding of some of the concepts and what they were assessing and thinking through during the course. And you can see the plan that they developed. How thorough was the plan? How well is the plan thought through, and did they try to implement their plan? Once a client leaves the Prime for Life program, our goal is for them to be in the preparation stage. Simply put, preparation is all about developing the plan, increasing our commitment, and increasing our motivation. In Prime for Life, we want to empower people, help motivate, give them tools that they themselves can utilize to put those plans into action. But during the Prime for Life program, we don't have time to see the clients into action. And that is where the clinicians and the treatment process comes into play. So you're picking up with action. Sometimes when they leave the Prime for Life program, they may have fallen back into that contemplation stage. That's normal behavior. We all do that. It'd be really nice if we all went through the 5 stages of change in order and all at once. But that is not typically how it is. We typically will go through couple of the stages, then we may slip back. We may get into preparation and go back to contemplation. We may go all the way back to pre-contemplation. Some people get all the way into action and slip back. That's human behavior. But now you have a foundation of what they're getting in the program so that when you see them afterwards, you can build on that platform. I've taken you through some small sections of the program, and now I want to step back a little bit and talk to you about process. So we have what we teach, which is the content, and then there's also how we teach it. And when we're working with instructors in the Prime for Life training, we not only spend time on content, but on how we say what we're saying. And there are 3 process domains that we focus our attention on that I'd like to at least mention for you. We talk about finish line focus, working with, and diffusing dissent. So just real quickly, when we think about finish line focus, a lot of times we're thinking about the finish line or meeting our goal. When we're working with instructors, we want them to realize that while those are important, there's not just one finish line. We have multiple goals all throughout the program, and keeping that stages of change mindset, knowing what the tasks are, the processes that we are utilizing, knowing that there's a goal at 30 minutes, there's a goal at 1 hour, is real important and can really help us make sure that all of the concepts are getting attended to. The other process is working with. And working with is all about partnership. It's about collaboration and making sure that the client feels engaged in this process, that we're not the experts, that they are also experts on their own life. And it really just brings an inclusive environment so that the clients feel very safe. The third process is diffusing dissent. And this is really all about engaging resistance without provoking defenses, being non-confrontational, non-judgmental, understanding that resistance is positive and that if resistance is happening, people are considering change, but at the same time, not engaging defenses that sometimes will show themselves in a group like this. Sometimes people will get angry or they'll start challenging the research, challenging the information, and we spend time working with instructors on how do I engage the resistance, the feeling that often is what's hiding beneath that defense. So an example of this might be someone is getting very defensive about some research. They're challenging it, debating with me. What we recommend is that we step back and think about what's that feeling that might be creating that defensiveness. Was it something that I did as the instructor to provoke it? Or is this a natural kind of resistance that has created itself? I want to step back and think about which it is, because if it's something I did, I can learn from that and change some of my techniques. If it's just a natural resistance that's happening from the client, I can think about what feeling they're experiencing. Perhaps they're just scared. They're worried about making changes. They're worried about changing friends, or what's going to happen if I don't make high-risk choices anymore. And engaging in that instead of in the defense. So we spend time looking at each of those domains, and one of the things that we offer to instructors is that they can videotape themselves, and we will provide feedback on both content and process, focusing on those 3 areas. One of the other things we offer for instructors is online resources. So after they've attended their initial training, it's a 3-day training, they have access to what we call an online manual. And this online manual gives them the opportunity not only to see the text of the program and the images and the media that's involved, but it also gives them a chance to watch someone teaching the program in an actual impaired driving class. So if I want to really hone in my skills in certain sections of the program, I can go online and watch that at my convenience. Not only do we offer the teaching segments on the online manual, but we also offer coaching segments. So let's say I'm an instructor, I'm really wanting to kind of hone in and develop skills around one particular section. I can watch it being taught, but then I also can get some advice on how to do that and helpful hints about small pieces. So it might be around transitions, the areas of the program that are a little more difficult to teach, and to really fine-tune those skills. So the online manual provides the instructors with a lot of continuing education and skill development that typically happens face-to-face, but this is one way that allows us to reach our instructors even beyond the training and continuing education conferences. Well, we are getting near the end of our time, and I would like to just share with you a few thoughts that I have. One is that keep in mind we were sharing with you very small sections of the program, and there's always a risk that it will create some questions or even some confusion. And so if you do have questions or comments or anything you would like clarification on, please feel free to contact us, and our contact information will be provided for you. We would rather you give us a call than to sit and struggle with some of the information that we've shared with you today. The other thing is we are in the process of revising the Prime for Life program. Prime for Life is in its 30th year. Prevention Research Institute was developed quite some time ago, and every few years we revise the program. We are right now in our 8th version, and as I had mentioned earlier, the 9th version will be released sometime around the end of this year. And so some of the content that I have shared with you is directly from the current version, and I've also at times shared some content that's coming from the newer version. And so there will be a time where the clients that you're seeing are going to be more familiar with the version that they are using at this point. So things like trigger level and trigger point. The trigger level is a term that we use in version 8. Trigger point, as I described to you today, is in the new version. And then I also told you a little bit about the phases, and that in the current version we use numbers, and in the future version we will be using colors. So if you have any questions at all about either version or any of the content that has been shared with you today, please feel free to call or email, and we will be happy to answer your questions. So I've mentioned that the Prime for Life program is a motivational intervention, and it's really designed to help people change their behavior. One of the things that we have come to see over the years is it works very well as a pre-treatment or treatment readiness program. When people leave the Prime for Life program, they tend to be less defensive. They also tend to be more willing to self-disclose. They will share more symptoms. And we find that a lot of clinicians indicate they feel they get a better assessment or a better evaluation of the clients after they've attended Prime for Life. We also have some data on this that you can access on our website. And so if you're interested in that, please visit the website and look at that technical report on treatment readiness. Here's what we see are, one major benefit of this program. When a client is coming into the clinical environment, a lot of times when clients come into treatment, they often don't think they need to be there. If they've already gone through Prime for Life, a lot of times what happens is that they've learned enough information, they've self-assessed, and they start seeing themselves in a different place. And we kind of see that as helping make your job a little easier. If the Prime for Life program has been delivered as it's designed, the clients coming in to treatment after Prime for Life will most likely be less defensive and more able to see where their drinking and drug choices have placed them. And so you may find that that's another benefit that you will experience with clients who have left the Prime for Life program.
The alcohol and drug field has for many years had a continuum of care of prevention, intervention, and recovery. We have worked more on the prevention end of that field, and the prevention continuum also has 3 areas. Universal prevention is prevention that is just aimed at a general audience. There's nothing in particular about the audience except that oftentimes they're a convenient sample. So all incoming college freshmen or all 5th graders or something like that. Then there is selected prevention. These are people who have some indicators that they might be at increased risk. So these may be people who have a family history of alcoholism or drug addiction. And we might want to look at those individuals as needing some additional attention and some additional services. I've already mentioned that there are people who have early behavioral problems, for example, and that might be another group that might be a selected prevention audience. Then there is the indicated prevention audience. The indicated prevention audience can be really confusing, especially for people who are in the treatment field, because these people oftentimes share many of the characteristics of those who have a substance use disorder. And so in the beginning, it can be difficult to tell which of these people actually are in need of treatment and which will benefit from a prevention intervention, a prevention program that can help them rethink what they're doing. So when we think about the indicated prevention audience, out of any particular group, for instance, with impaired driving offenders, when they come into a program, some of them are there because they have significant drinking or drug problems, and they are going to qualify for and need treatment. But you also have in an impaired driving program people who oftentimes are younger and who were making some high-risk choices, but it's not so much a part of their lives and so much a change in their own response in biology that they really are in need of treatment yet. For those people, an intervention like Prime for Life can be very helpful to get them to stop and rethink, and they may not even qualify for treatment. They may not meet treatment diagnostic symptoms. And so given that, what PRI has designed in the Prime for Life program is really a program that filled a gap that existed in our field, because there was this group of people who the treatment field said, well, they don't really belong to us, they don't meet our criteria. And for a period of time, there were people in the prevention field saying they're already using and we only do zero tolerance stuff, so we can't do anything with them because they're already using. So the purpose of the Prime for Life program has been to sort of stand in that gap and work with those people who are already using, but who may or may not need treatment. Fortunately, one of the things that also happened with the Prime for Life program was that it was found to be a very effective pre-treatment program for people who were going to go on into treatment. That is, it was not at all unusual for treatment staff to report back to us that when they began seeing people who had been through the Prime for Life program, those people were coming in more treatment ready, more willing to accept their diagnosis, more willing to work with a treatment plan because they had already processed that there was something going on here that they were going to need to address. So the Prime for Life program then addresses the prevention audience. It's used in some settings for universal and selective prevention, but the majority of the places in which Prime for Life is being used is with that indicated prevention audience and with people who are in a pre-treatment experience. If you're interested in accessing Prime for Life and using it, then because it is an evidence-based practice, we do require training to use the program. There are 3-day trainings that are fairly intensive, and they're held at various places around the nation. And you can find our upcoming training schedule on our website, www.primeforlife.org. You can register for a training, and at the training you will get to experience the Prime for Life program, and you will also get the opportunity to practice and work with the program. You'll also receive a full set of materials. There's a complete instructor's manual. There are media discs that provide very short video clips and graphics that help you explain the concepts and create that experience. PRI's goal is to reduce the incidence of alcohol and drug problems in the world, and that may sound like a pretty big goal, and it is, but we do that by trying to produce really excellent materials, but also we work with some of the best people in the world who really care about the people in their groups, their clients, and who want to do really good work with them and want to be effective. And it's just a pleasure that we have to work with those folks, to provide them with resources, and to provide them with the support. And so for us, our instructors are almost like a part of the family. All of us working together toward this common goal of improving our communities and helping people to make choices that improve their own lives as well. And so we invite you to be a part of the Prime for Life experience. We hope you'll join us.
Alan mentioned that counselors who see people clients who have been through Prime for Life often comment on how the person came in more treatment ready. Many of those counselors over the years have asked us to develop a program for counselors that would be sort of a companion program to Prime for Life. We've done that, and it's called Prime Solutions. So it is, as we mentioned earlier, an evidence-derived program. It's too new yet for us to consider it to be evidence-based, but we are conducting the research on it. People do not have to go through Prime for Life before they go into Prime Solutions. Prime Solutions is designed to help counselors implement evidence-based practices in a way that's easier. We've all experienced it. We go to a workshop, we learn something new, we come back excited and we plan to do it. And then we get the crush of everyday work. And it just becomes hard to implement those new practices into our everyday work. And if we do implement them, often we're not sure whether we're doing it the way it was designed to be done or not. Prime Solutions is designed to fill that gap, to help people be more confident in applying evidence-based practices, and the training is done in such a way that they can get feedback about how well they're doing the practices. We're not going to go into any more depth on Prime Solutions here, but if you're interested in knowing more, you can contact us, or you can go to the primeforlife.org website.